Families are complicated things at the best of times. I can only hope that your family is nowhere near as complicated as those featured in this Iceberg video. It's over 2 hours long, so get comfortable, because we're going in. She wasn't in the seat. That was the first thing that Karen Molt noticed as the familiar black Mercedes rolled to a stop outside the shop where she worked. She'd been expecting, hoping, praying to see her daughter sitting there. Maybe injured, perhaps shaken, but definitely alive. Instead, her eyes were pulled downwards to the dark corner beneath the glove compartment, crumpled, bent, jammed awkwardly in the footwell like discarded luggage. There she was. Karen reached inside the car, trying to move her into the seat, whispering her name, willing her to respond. But she didn't. I saw her face, Karen would later tell the court, and I felt sick. The call came just after 7:30 p.m. Karen answered on instinct. Her phone had already lit up more than a dozen times by the time it had gotten to this point of the day. Most of the calls were from one number that she'd been trying to ignore for months. But this time, she picked up. "I will bring your daughter over," the voice said, gravelly and unsteady. "She's dead." Karen froze. Which one was the voice referring to? She had 4 children. All of them lived with her now. They were safe, or so she thought, under the roof of her new home. After everything they'd endured, Lauren, the eldest at 19, had taken on quite a protector role, helping with her siblings whilst trying to rebuild her own life. The desperate mother screamed into the phone, "Which one? Which one?" But the man wouldn't say. The line then went dead. Karen struggled to breathe. The terrified mother tried to convince herself that this was all a lie, just an empty threat, something meant to hurt, not something that was actually happening. Maybe it was just a scare tactic. After all, he'd used these plenty before. Or maybe one of her girls was with him, upset, but surely not actually gone. She told herself, if he's driving here, she must be okay. Why else would he do it? Just minutes later, the Mercedes pulled up, and Karen's world split in two. She would later testify, "I just knew she wasn't going to make it. The feeling of dread started to come over me, and then I saw her inside the car. It was Lauren, gone." Nigel Molt wasn't living with his family. In fact, he wasn't supposed to be anywhere near them. At the time, he was out on bail, awaiting trial for 2 counts of domestic assault against his wife, Karen. The conditions of his bail were clear. He must make no contact with her. He must not visit the house, nor could he turn up at Karen's work. Those orders were issued just months earlier in April of 2021, after Karen reported him to the police, and that wasn't for the first time. Their relationship had been unravelling for years. Karen described it as a slow collapse under the weight of alcohol, violence and control. Nigel was volatile. He was extremely possessive, and he was prone to a fragile temper. According to the prosecution, his entire relationship with his wife, and later with their children, was marked by 3 things: drinking, substance taking, and anger. By late 2021, the couple were now officially estranged. Karen and the children had moved to a new house in West Winch, Norfolk, and they were trying their best to start over. Lauren, now 19, stayed with her mother, alongside her younger siblings. She had a job, a boyfriend, and plans. Things weren't perfect, but at least now they were finally quieter and safer. Until, that is, the calls started again. They were from Nigel, from the same number. Sometimes he would leave voicemails, other times he would just hang up. There were always excuses as to why he was contacting her. He said there was something that needed picking up. He had something important to say. But of course, Karen knew better. She rightly chose to ignore them. But Nigel was not a man who handled being ignored very well. In the weeks before January the 23rd, he became more and more persistent. he became more agitated. He began demanding contact with the kids and with Karen, but most of all with Lauren, the daughter who now stood between him and the control that he once held. On January the 23rd, 2022, Nigel Malt spent the day in motion. Just after 6:25 p.m, he arrived outside Karen's workplace. The doors were locked. She didn't come out. He didn't go in. Instead, he just got back in his car, the black Mercedes saloon, and sat outside, repeatedly dialing the landline at Karen's home in West Winch. Lauren and her boyfriend Arthur Marnell were there. The phone rang once, twice. In fact, again and again and again. In total, Nigel made 19 attempted calls between 6:25 p.m. and 6:52 p.m. All of them were rightly ignored. He finally gave up and drove to the house on Leet Way, and there he parked outside. He knocked on the door but nobody answered, so he left and then called again. In fact, another 3 times. Finally, at 7:20 p.m, Lauren picked up the phone. That final call lasted just 66 seconds, and we don't know exactly what was said. But something within that minute made Nigel turn the car around and return to Leet Way, and now he was angry. This time he did not knock on the door. This time he was no longer trying to be let in. According to Arthur, who would later testify, Nigel pulled onto the driveway. He got out the car, and then he began shouting, and he had a crowbar in his hand. Lauren and Arthur had moved outside. Nigel was trying to get at the boyfriend. Lauren stepped in. She told her father to leave. She told him just to go home, and then she stood between them. Nigel didn't get the last word that night, at least not with his voice. Temporarily defeated, he instead got back in the car. He turned the key and pressed his foot to the accelerator. Leet Way was quiet. It was a small residential street in West Winch in Norfolk. There were rows of brick homes, parked cars, not the sort of place where neighbours would expect to hear shouting. Certainly not like this. But just after 7:25 p.m. that Sunday evening, the silence was shattered. Several residents stepped out of their homes when they heard horrifying raised voices. Some of them already knew who Nigel Malt was. One neighbour even started recording a video on their phone, and what they saw was a confrontation. Nigel was shouting, he was slurring his words. He was waving something about in his hands, which turned out to be the metal crowbar. Arthur, Lauren's boyfriend, kept his distance, but Lauren was no longer scared. Witnesses could hear her yelling, clearly and firmly, for her father to leave. "Go home," she said. "Leave us alone." Lauren bravely stood her ground. She blocked the path between her father, Arthur, and the house. And for a moment it did work. Nigel lowered the crowbar, turned around and walked back towards his car. It looked like he was finally giving up, ready to just drive away into the night. However, he didn't leave, at least not straight away. Nigel instead got into the driver's seat. He shut the door, turned on the ignition, and then shifted the car into reverse. At first, nobody moved. In fact, nobody could believe what they were seeing. Lauren remained behind the vehicle. She was close to the bumper, watching. The engine revved, and then came the first thud. The car jolted. Someone shouted from a doorway, "You've killed her. You've f***ing killed her." Nigel now stopped. Silence fell over the scene, and then he shifted gears once again, this time pulling forwards, and then he pressed down on the pedal hard. Most of what happened that night outside the house was witnessed. In fact, some of it was recorded. It captured Nigel yelling from his driver's seat, "Lauren, get up, please." But Lauren did not get up. That's because she couldn't. She was now beneath the car. The recordings captured something else too, something more haunting than words alone. You could hear groaning, the unmistakable sound of someone in pain, someone desperate, injured, trapped. And then there was another burst of movement. The Mercedes rolled forward once again, but this time it didn't seem to be in panic. This time it was deliberate. One witness described this later as like someone finishing the job. When the car finally stopped, the groaning noise stopped with it. Neighbours screamed from their doorsteps. One person shouted to call the police. But what Nigel did next made everything so much worse. He got out of the car, he bent down, and then picked Lauren up off the floor and placed her into the passenger side of the car. She could not sit fully upright, she just crumpled in the space. She fell, bending awkwardly into the footwell beneath the dashboard. Then Nigel shut the door, he got behind the wheel once more and drove off into the night. Nigel did not go to the police, he did not call for an ambulance, he did not drive to the hospital to try and save his daughter. Instead, he drove back to Karen, and when she saw what he'd done, she couldn't even scream. She just stared and whispered her daughter's name. When this case hit the courtroom and the footage was played for those present and the pathologist's report was laid bare, there was no room for denial of what had happened here. Lauren Moult did not meet her end in an accident. She didn't collapse due to medical issues. She wasn't simply clipped by a reversing car in poor light. She was run over twice, on purpose. And the terrifying sequence of events was confirmed by multiple witnesses, by CCTV footage, by mobile phone footage and forensic evidence. Nigel Moult reversed into her, knocking her to the ground. He paused, then reversed further, crushing her body beneath the wheels. He stopped and then drove forwards over the body another time. This caused catastrophic injuries. In fact, a post-mortem examination found crushing injuries to her chest, her abdomen, head, arms and legs. Her back was broken, pelvis shattered. She had internal injuries and multiple rib fractures. She was, however, alive after the first impact. She may have even still been conscious, but after the second, she couldn't move even if she wanted to. She could no longer draw in breath, and the prosecution called this deliberate. The weapon in this case was a black Mercedes saloon used with purpose in an alcohol-fueled rage in a residential street. And Nigel's defense, he said he didn't see her behind the car. He said he thought that he'd hit a wheelie bin. He said that the whole thing was just an accident. But even he couldn't explain the second pass, nor why he moved her body, but failed to call emergency services, or why he called Karen and said, "I'll bring your daughter over, she's dead," because by then he knew exactly what he'd done, and he just kept making things worse. Nigel Moult was sentenced to life in prison. Originally, the minimum term was set at 18 years, but the sentence was later deemed as unduly lenient, and it was then increased to 22 years by the Court of Appeal. Still, for Karen Moult, the courtroom didn't offer closure. For something like this, I don't think it ever could. Reading her statement aloud, she described the moment that her ex-husband pulled up at her workplace, how she peered inside and saw her daughter stuffed in the footwell. She said, "Seeing her in that position for me was worse than knowing that she had been run over. I tried to move her into the seat. He didn't help. He just stood there. I can't fathom how a parent could kill their own child." And then just one final question, spoken to no one in particular. How do you forgive? And there was really no answer. The question met with silence. This is the kind of grief that will never go away. In the years after his conviction, Nigel Moult was transferred to HMP Gartree, a Category B prison in Leicestershire, and there, in early 2025, his time on this earth came to an end in custody. No cause has been publicly confirmed, and a spokesperson for the prison service stated only that, as with all deaths in custody, the prison and probation ombudsman will investigate. Nigel was 47 years old. There was no public statement from the family. And now, frustratingly, there is no further justice to be served. The voice on the line was flat, almost rehearsed. It shared harrowing words with the 999 call handler, words that left police and paramedics rushing to the scene. Moments later, emergency responders entered a quiet home in Cedar Gardens, Brighton. Upstairs, the bathwater was tinged red. 69-year-old Sue Addis was floating in it. This whole thing started as a rescue plan. It started with love, but somehow something much darker took over. To understand how devastating this crime was to the city of Brighton, you first have to understand who Sue Addis was. She wasn't just a grandmother, she was the heart and soul of her community. She co-owned two of Brighton's most iconic Italian restaurants, Donatello and Pinocchio. Both were frequented by celebrities, footballers, tourists and locals alike. Former Prime Minister Tony Blair had eaten there, so had Katie Price, aka Jordan, and Bill Nighy too. But Sue's focus was never just the elite, it was really the everyday people. She ran her businesses with warmth and generosity, employing scores of young people over the decades, and often giving second chances to those who needed them. Sue was also deeply involved in charity work, supporting causes like the Argus Appeal, Martlet's Hospice, and Rocking Horse, a children's charity that was close to her heart. Friends described her as vibrant, loving, and relentlessly supportive. She was a matriarch in every sense, not just to her family, but to her city. So when news broke on January the 7th, 2021, that Sue Addis had lost her life, the shockwaves hit hard. This was a life-changing event for Pietro, her 17-year-old grandson, a boy she'd once described as gentle, bright, a little lost maybe, but still full of promise. A boy she'd invited into her home just a few days earlier. She wasn't moving him in as a punishment, but she believed he needed saving. Pietro Addis was no stranger to hardship. His parents had separated when he was young, and sadly his mother passed away when he was just 6 years old. After that, he was raised primarily by his father Leo in Brighton. Teachers noticed early signs of emotional turbulence. Pietro struggled to focus in school. He was often distracted, impulsive, and prone to outbursts of frustration. In 2018, he was diagnosed with ADHD, and he was placed on Elvance. This is an amphetamine-based medication made to help with concentration and mood regulation. But despite this prescription, things didn't seem to improve. He had trouble settling into mainstream school, eventually transferring to a local catering college. He worked part-time at Donatello, his grandmother's restaurant. But even that, under the protective eye of grandmother Sue, it wasn't enough to anchor him. By 2019, he had started using green. It was casual at first, and then it became habitual and daily. Over time, arguments with his father escalated, and Pietro became increasingly withdrawn, defiant, and erratic. There were rumours that he was selling off his clothes to be able to afford more substances. At home, tensions peaked when family members caught him misusing his medication. He was taking higher doses of Elvance than necessary to chase a high or to stay up all night. By December 2020, the situation was unmanageable. After a particularly intense argument with his stepmother over flushing his ADHD medication, Pietro was asked to leave his father's home. So that's when she invited her grandson to come and stay with her, just for a while, just until things settled. To her friends, Sue said she was worried, but she was hopeful. She wanted to help him get clean. She still believed that he could be helped. What she didn't know though, what she couldn't have known, was just how far things had already spiraled. There was the green, the ADHD medications, and a young man sinking deeper into the darkness. Cedar Gardens is a quiet cul-de-sac in the Withdean area of Brighton, and it offered peace and privacy for this tough situation. Sue liked to keep her home in pristine condition. She was organised, nurturing, and she was still working part-time despite her age. But as the week wore on, Sue began to see the cracks emerging. Pietro still wasn't attending college. He was missing shifts at the restaurant. He would spend hours alone in his room or slouched on the couch, listlessly. Other times he'd snap at nothing, He'd fidget or just go completely silent. To friends, Sue confided that Pietro was acting strangely. She started to feel unsure and unsettled. Still, she loved him and she didn't give up. Sue was 69, a cancer survivor, and was the only surviving parent of Pietro's father, and the weight of that responsibility was falling squarely on her shoulders. Just days into the new year, she was no longer just a grandmother, she was the last person standing between Pietro and complete collapse. It seems she was also the only one still trying to help him. It turns out the substances that Pietro was using were far more serious than anyone thought. The cocktail of substances in his system in the months before the events of this video was quite staggering. Tests would later show green, that substance that's made for horses, that white one off of Scarface, the bricks that rappers love, and even his grandmother's breast cancer medication, letrozole. He was of course also misusing Alvance, his prescribed ADHD stimulant, as well as reportedly taking Adderall on top of it. This combination was toxic. Family members began withholding prescriptions, hoping the break might help him reset his brain. But Pietro resisted. He craved Alvance. He said it helped his anxiety and claimed it made him feel less paranoid. In truth, it was very probably just feeding a dangerous instability. His behavior became erratic and alarming. He was punching walls, punching himself, and was no longer leaving the home for anything productive. And whilst he was in the house, he would pace up and down or self-isolate. She contacted his old doctor, the one who had diagnosed him with ADHD, and she asked him for advice. She was told that he should see a therapist. And on November 29th, 2020, she searched online for psychologist youth in Brighton. She followed up with online searches for mental health clinics. On January 7th, 2021, she searched for the Priory in Ticehurst, a private clinic that treats addictions and mental health conditions. She also checked the driving distance from her house to the clinic, and that search suggests that she was now ready to take the next step and would arrange inpatient care for Pietro. That's how determined she was. But she also knew that time was running out. In her own words, the family was having problems with Pietro. On some nights, he would stand outside his grandmother's bedroom door repeating, "I love you, I love you, I love you." And through all of this, Sue tried to remain calm. She tried to continue to be supportive, but she was truly, deeply concerned. On the morning of January 7th, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Sue made breakfast, Pietro showered, and there were no visible signs of a breakdown or an argument between the two. No neighbours reported hearing anything unusual. This is the same day that Sue searched for the Priory Clinic online. It wasn't just a vague idea anymore, it was a plan that was forming in real time. That evening, the two ate dinner together, and according to what Pietro later told doctors, there was no indication of conflict, but somewhere between the meal and what followed, something shifted. Pietro claimed he believed his grandmother meant to harm him. He said she had gone to the kitchen and had returned with sharp implements, that she left them there, and that he took them. Pietro retrieved multiple sharp implements from the kitchen. Experts for the defense would later argue this was a moment his transient paranoid psychosis took hold, that he genuinely believed Sue intended to hurt him. He entered the bathroom while Sue was in the tub, and he then lunged at her over and over. 4 of the 17 times he lunged at her were said to be catastrophic enough on their own that any one of them would have ended Sue's time on this earth. In fact, one completely severed a rib. After he did what he did, Pietro stood up, he changed his clothes, and then at 7:06 p.m, he called emergency services. And this is that call. I have removed some pauses, but the body of it is all original.
Sussex Police Emergency.
I'm calling to tell myself.
Okay, what's your name?
Pietro Addis.
How do I spell your name?
Pietro.
Perfect. And your surname?
Addi.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay. And where are you at the moment?
1 Caesars Gardens.
1 Caesars Gardens, is that? Okay. Give me 2 moments. Do you have a postcode for that? Hello? Hello? Hello, is anyone there?
Hello?
Hello. I just need to get some more information from you. What town is that in?
Brighton.
Gotcha. And that's Cedars Gardens, yeah? Okay. And so when you say you're going to hand yourself in, what is it that you've done? Hello? Hello, you there? Hello? Okay. What's your date of birth? We'll work with that.
March 30th, 2003.
Okay. So when you say you're going to hand yourself in, what do you think you've done?
There's been a murder.
Okay. And where's that happened?
1 Cedars Gardens.
Okay. And who's been murdered?
My grandma.
Police and paramedics were already on their way. When officers arrived just minutes later, Pietro was waiting outside. He was calm and distant. He led them into the house. He led them into the bathroom. Sue was found submerged in red water in the bath. A sharp kitchen implement lay on the bath mat. Another was lodged beneath her. A third, larger one, was later discovered in Pietro's bedroom, hidden inside a jacket. During the attack, Pietro focused on the neck, the chest, the torso, arms and legs. Loving grandmother Sue had likely never seen this coming. Pietro was arrested on the spot. Officers noted that he was composed and he was answering questions in a flat, detached tone. It didn't feel like a breakdown to them. This felt like a decision. Here is all available body cam footage of this event, and it's worth watching in its entirety. Don't worry, it's not too long either. It's just very strange and very disturbing.
Hello.
Or stop. Unlock the door.
1 o'clock, Okay, what's happening? Okay, at this
What's
moment,
happened?
I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder, okay? Focus 2 seconds.
You didn't have to say.
Where is your nan?
In the bath.
Where?
In the bath?
Child room at 104.
Bathroom,
A male has
yeah.
been detained in hospital of murder.
Upstairs. Is anyone else in the house?
You take him.
Yep.
People are dead.
It's just you in the house. And it's Pietro. What's your surname?
Addis.
Addis. What's your date of birth? Okay. Upstairs?
Where's the weapon?
It was a knife.
Where is
It's
it
a
now?
knife.
Is it on your person?
Possibly.
Where, mate?
He hasn't been searched.
Where is it?
Either in my pocket or in the box.
Pietro.
Find it.
Is it in the property?
Yes.
Where in the property? In the bathroom or the kitchen? And was it just one night?
Yes.
Can we confirm when did he do it? How long ago was it?
Pietro.
An hour.
An hour?
Approximately an hour, just a little off the statement happened approximately 1 hour ago. Yeah, paramedic staff, can you just grab quick numbers or names or something so we know.
Okay, so we'll take you to custody.
Yes, all medical, no one else.
Has anyone else been in the house? No, just you and your nan. Is she taking your medication? Do we need to take that with you?
Where is that?
Okay. You can take your medication to custody if you need it. Yeah? What do you take, mate? If you tell us, we can take it with you if you need it.
It's not there.
Where is it? Do you live somewhere else normally?
Okay.
Okay, we can figure out how we can get collected the medication you need, yeah?
What medication is it?
L1s? What's that for?
ADHD.
ADHD.
Do you
Okay.
suffer with any medical conditions that we need to be aware of to look after you?
Where do you normally live, sorry?
Do you have any medical conditions?
Just
I broke my hand
When? Now?
earlier.
earlier.
Which hand?
Touching the wall.
Which hand is it?
This one.
Your right one.
This one. Whereabouts do you think you've hurt it? We can get the nurse in custody to have a look at that. Okay? Do you have any mental health conditions we need to be aware of? Apart from the you said ADHD.
Anything else?
Obviously, it'll be under caution if you make a comment.
Pietro, where do you normally live?
At the other house.
Your other house? Is it nearby?
You have three rights when you get to custody, okay? You have the right to let someone notify that you've been arrested, okay? You have the right to free and legal independent advice, okay? So a solicitor, which can either be if you have one in mind, if you know one, or a duty solicitor to be contacted to come and speak to you, okay, and then represent you if you so wish. Then you have a right to read the Codes of Practice, okay, which is a long rule book about what we can and can't do whilst you're in custody of us, okay? It's boring, I'm not going to lie to you, but it will pass some time, okay?
You might have to have what we call an appropriate adult interview because you're under 18. So that can
Can I
be...
get my medication?
You want your medication?
Of course you can.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, man. Nice and calm. There's a lot of people out there, a lot of stuff going on. After you, mate.
Thank you. Okay, okay.
You go, mate.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So I'll take you to custody, alright? Okay? Yeah, keep going. You're sitting here for us.
At trial, Pietro Addis admitted to ending his grandmother, but he denied that it was murder. His legal team argued that he was experiencing paranoid psychosis at the time, that his ability to form rational judgment or to control his actions was impaired. They brought in a psychiatrist, Dr. Peter Misk. He testified that Pietro genuinely believed his grandmother did mean him harm, that the psychotic break that he suffered from was brief and transient, and that it had resolved without medication soon after the event. He didn't know what he was trying to do, Dr. Misk said. He thought she was going to kill him. However, the prosecution had its own expert, Dr. Duncan Harding, and he did not agree. Harding called Pietro an unreliable malingerer, someone just pretending to be mentally ill. He reviewed body cam footage from the arrest, and he concluded that Pietro was lucid, calm, not disorientated, not confused, and not psychotic. Harding said it was anger, not delusion, that led to his grandmother's passing. He also pointed out that Pietro had been in escalating conflict with his family, that his access to substances, both illegal and his ADHD medication, was being restricted, and that Sue, as the family matriarch, was trying to arrange treatment against his wishes, and that the location of the sharp implements, the number of markings on Sue's body, and the act of changing clothes afterwards all indicated planning and not panic. Perhaps most damning of all though, Pietro showed no signs of psychosis after his arrest. He wasn't prescribed antipsychotics in hospital. His cognition was described as intact. He also had the presence of mind to call the police. He didn't try to flee, and he didn't appear out of control. The judge called it a high degree of responsibility, despite the jury accepting a partial defense. Because what mattered wasn't just the state that Pietro was in, it was the choice that he still could make. On May the 5th, 2023, Pietro Addis stood before Judge Christine Lane Casey at Lewes Crown Court. He was no longer the teenager who had stepped into his grandmother's home 2 years earlier, but he wasn't now a free man either. The jury had accepted his plea of manslaughter by diminished responsibility, rejecting the charge of murder. Judge Lane acknowledged that Pietro had been a child at the time of the event. However, she would not absolve him. This is an utterly dreadful example, she said, of what can come from misusing substances, including prescription medications. She emphasized that if Pietro had not been using green, had not been misusing Elvance, it's highly unlikely that this would have happened to Sue. And yet, in the face of unimaginable loss, the Addis family extended compassion. Sue's children and grandchildren told the court that they still loved Pietro, that they believed the greatest punishment was knowing what he had done. Pietro Addis was sentenced to just 15 years, 10 in custody and 5 on extended license. He'll serve at least 2/3 before he's eligible for release, and when that day comes, he'll walk free. If he returns to his family, one seat at the table will always be empty. The house on Briley Ridge was locked up tight. No one answered the door when the worker knocked. He was only supposed to install some siding, maybe fix a few windows for the elderly homeowner, Trudy Fields. But now, standing alone in the yard, he noticed something odd. There were drag marks, lines in the grass leading away from the back porch, like something heavy had been forcefully pulled. He followed them without hesitation, each step pushing him closer to something he wouldn't be able to unsee. Behind the home, half tucked beside a folded, red-stained mattress, was a truly horrifying sight. By the time state troopers arrived, a second mattress had been dragged towards the back of the house, and inside the home, behind locked doors, sat a woman refusing to answer. Hours later, officers forced entry. They found her alone, and inside her kitchen, a pot in the oven still warm to the touch, and inside it, something they would never forget. This one spirals fast. Before the horrifying headlines and before this mugshot, and long before police found what they found in the kitchen, Toralina May Fields was just a girl with big dreams. She grew up in rural Kentucky and had classic country girl vibes. There were chickens in the yard, a piano on the porch, bouncy blonde curls, and a girl that everyone called Tori. Her family described her childhood as loving and stable. She was a girl who went fishing with her dad, who rode horses with her cousins, but that dreamed of something bigger. In high school, she was voted as biggest flirt. She ran track, and she joined community service clubs. Her yearbook quote read, "There are 2 types of people in the world, those who are forgotten and those who are remembered. I choose to be remembered." And it seems that she really meant this. After graduating in 2011, Tori enrolled at Morehead State University, and there she majored in criminology. However, her passion leaned more towards lights and cameras than to law. She moved to California in her 20s and rebranded herself as Naomi Navarre. She was an actress, a fitness influencer, and an aspiring singer. She starred in indie films like The Desert Project and A Dance Story, where she played a confident ballroom dancer opposite the film's lead. The director described her as a dream to work with. She was bright, she was tough, and she was always laughing on set.
Actor and director Andoni Zorbis says for months he worked closely with the woman known as Naomi Navarre after she was cast as the role of Victoria in A Dance Story.
We bonded over our mothers, so, she really loved her mother, which is very odd of what happened. Like on one occasion when I was driving her, she said to me that, "Oh, you should come and taste my mother's cookies because she makes the best cookies."
But behind the energy and the ambition, something was shifting. Friends say that the sparkle in her eyes began to fade, but then came the accident. Before the main focus of this video, another quiet tragedy had already rocked the Fields family. In 2021, Toralina's brother, Truett, lost custody of his 3 young sons whilst living in California. It was never made public exactly why they were taken, but what came next would leave a lingering suspicion. Toralina's dreams of stardom would have to go on hold as she took on custody of the boys, her nephews. She housed them in a trailer at an RV park in Riverside County. Just weeks later, the youngest nephew, around 14 months, was gone. Toralina told investigators that she laid him down to take a nap, and when she returned, his lips were purple. He was laying with his eyes open. She tried CPR, but he couldn't be revived. Brother Truett told a judge this was a result of SIDS, but the coroner ruled it as hypothermia. No charges were ever filed. The case was labelled as exceptional and then quietly closed. But the Fields family never forgot this, and according to courtroom testimony years later, mother Trudy Fields believed her son and daughter were both hiding the truth. After this terrible loss, Torelina didn't go back to Kentucky right away. Instead, she stayed near her brother Truett, deep in the California desert. The brother had been living off-grid for years in a lawless squatter settlement called Slab City. There was no running water, no electricity, just solar panels, old trailers, a community of strangers living by their own rules. Truett, known as Bear, was a local fixture there. He gave interviews to documentary filmmakers, posted strange spiritual monologues on social media, and bragged online that he'd gone 30 years without killing anybody. It was during this time that Torelina suffered the serious motorbike crash, and then she was back in Kentucky, and just weeks after that, the events of this video happened. Her dreams of becoming an ultra-famous actress were now gone, and now a new and very different life lay ahead of her. And this is when her mother Trudy stepped in. She brought her daughter back home, back to Kentucky, back to Briley Ridge, but nobody could have predicted what would happen next. October the 8th, 2024, a local worker arrived at the Fields residence to begin repairs on Trudy's home. He saw both women on the property, Trudy the homeowner and Torelina, who was now living there full-time after her return from California. However, the worker left unsettled. Something about Torelina's behaviour didn't sit right. He later told police that she'd been casting spells and acting aggressively towards him and a colleague. He used the word confrontational. He said she didn't seem grounded in reality, and nobody knew it at the time, but that would be the last time that anyone saw Trudy alive. When the man returned the next day at around noon, no one answered the door to the home, and now something felt wrong. It was quiet, but in a way that felt off. And then the man noticed them. The marks in the grass, heavy erratic drag lines leading away from the porch. Following this trail, he reached the back of the property, and that's when he found her. A human body, and I mean literally the body, torso only. It was lying beside a folded, red-soaked mattress. There were no limbs, no head, and hair had been piled nearby. The man stumbled back and called 911, and he told dispatchers what he'd seen. He believed the body belonged to homeowner Trudy Fields. Kentucky State Police responded immediately. They found the front door locked and nobody answering. They circled the property, noting congealed red on the back porch and threshold. Inside the home, someone was moving, but whoever was inside wouldn't speak. They wouldn't open the door, and so the special response team was called in. It was the kind of call that police would never forget. The handyman was just someone that Trudy had hired. "I think there's a body in the backyard," he said, and by the time troopers reached Briley Ridge and the man led them behind the house, they found exactly what he described. The torso indeed lay there, just like the man had said. And yes, beside it, the folded mattress soaked in red. When officers unfolded the mattress, they found more. There were organs, body parts. They were stuffed inside, discarded, and creating a surreal scene. Notably though, even combining all of the visible parts outside of the home, there was still a lot of this person missing. And believe me, this story somehow finds a way to keep on getting worse and worse. The drag marks in the grass traced the path from the back door to the place where the body now lay. The scene was gruesome, but it was only the beginning. The woman was clearly, obviously no longer alive, but who was it that was hiding inside the home? And why wouldn't they come out? Police tried knocking, they tried calling out, issuing commands. However, they received nothing back. But there was visible movement inside, shadows through the windows. They decided to escalate the situation.
Getting a search warrant for the residence. Our special response team responded to serve that search warrant due to the circumstances surrounding the body and unknown what's in the property in the house.
A search warrant was obtained, a robot deployed, and according to officers on scene, whoever it was inside the property appeared to respond to this situation by casting spells at the robot. They then communicated in gibberish or perhaps speaking tongues. But whatever language she was speaking, it wasn't one that officers could understand. With things getting more tense, and with a still unknown potential danger just waiting inside for officers, the decision was made to deploy tear gas. But still, somehow, nothing. And finally, at around 11 p.m, officers forced entry. Inside, they found Toralina May Fields. She was alive, alone, but covered in a deep crimson red. The inside of the home was no less disturbing. The blood on Toralina's hands wasn't just metaphorical, it was literal. Her face, hands and clothing were all soaked. As troopers secured her, they began clearing rooms, and that's when someone opened the oven. Inside, they found a stainless steel pot. It was still hot to the touch, and inside the pot, the truly unfathomable, what looked like human remains. Head, hands, feet, forearms, all charred. Courtroom documents later revealed the body parts had been deliberately placed in the pot and then heated until they were charred. They weren't just stored there, they had been cooked. Investigators also found the body of a dog, and sadly it's believed that it had been severely maltreated before then having its time ended on that same day. It wasn't clear at the time whether the animal belonged to the household or not. Photos taken at the scene were so graphic that only a limited number were entered into evidence. Even seasoned troopers called it one of their worst discoveries of their career. Trudy Field, 68, was found blasted in the head and then jabbed multiple times. She had then been severely disassembled.
A woman we spoke to anonymously says she's known the victim a while and last saw her about a month ago.
She was very kind, very giving, just very soft-spoken, never said a bad word about anyone. You couldn't help but not love her. I cried, and I'm just in shock because I just can't believe it happened, and I can't believe it happened here in this small town.
At the time of her arrest, Toralina did not resist. She did not try to run, and it's said that she didn't appear frantic. She was now weirdly calm. The woman they took into custody did visually seem to match the chaos they found her in, but to many, it looked like she maybe didn't even know what she'd done, but others weren't so sure. When those handcuffs clicked shut, it was the first quiet moment in an otherwise unthinkable day. Toralina Field, 32, was taken into custody without incident. But without incident shouldn't downplay how horrifying any of this is. She was then charged with obstruction, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. And then 5 days later, a grand jury added capital murder and one more charge, a charge that made even more stomachs turn and brought on increasing anger, animal torture. Her bond was set at $1.5 million.
32-year-old Toralina May Fields faces a number of charges, including obstructing governmental operations, tampering with physical evidence, and abuse of a corpse. Authorities say additional charges may still be filed. This all started Wednesday when state police responded to a disturbing crime scene at a home in Mount Olivet. Two men working on the property found a woman's dismembered body and called police.
She was booked into the Bourbon County Detention Center, where she was held in isolation. What was still missing here was Toralina's why. That answer wasn't in any arrest report, and for those that knew her, the disconnect was impossible to bridge. Just 5 years earlier, she had been on a movie set in Los Angeles, smiling and focused. Now she stood accused of one of the most gruesome crimes that the state of Kentucky had ever seen. Police also learned something else troubling and potentially harmful to delivering justice in the way that they wanted. Toralina had been found legally incompetent to stand trial in California in early 2024. Those records were sealed, but they did raise critical questions. Did she even understand what was happening now? Was she aware of what she'd done? Her family showed up to court expecting to see someone broken. Instead, they saw her alert, well-kept and composed. This was her first appearance after the indictment. She was no longer the haunted figure from the mugshot. She was not the chaotic, spell-casting woman that police described. I didn't see anything that said she was out of her mind, her uncle Todd Brock later told reporters. She was alert, paid attention to the judge. She didn't look psycho, that's what shocked me. Her cousin Olivia added, she looked like she knew what she did. I mean, I don't have the words, but not everyone agreed. Her defense attorney, Laura Fitzer, immediately filed a motion for psychiatric evaluation. She claimed that Torolina could not meaningfully participate in her own defense, and that she showed signs of serious mental illness. The judge approved the request. The court proceedings were paused, and the evaluation would be done in person, not over a call nor through a screen. So things would take a little longer. Some of the ways in which the defendant's possible mental illness manifests require observation of her conduct and mannerisms, the motion stated. Fitzer also pointed to the behaviour on October the 8th and 9th, the spellcasting, the gibberish, the refusal to leave the home even when being tear-gassed. Still, her family remains divided.
Today, charges were taken out of district court, now filed in circuit court. But in the same Robertson County courthouse, there are new insights into the suspect's immediate family and more unsettling issues. This protection order, just filed by the suspect's sister, Telby Fields, says another family member has threatened to kill her. We're not naming that person. She says the person is mentally and utterly unstable. She ends the application saying, when my body is found, she says, this person murdered me. A protective order, the latest dark chapter.
The redacted name from this clip is Truitt. So, Torolina's sister filed a protective order against Truitt. She claimed that what Torolina did wasn't just madness, but it was a manipulation, that Truitt had advised her to do this, that he believed ending their mother would secure his birthright, which I guess is the family farm and land, as the firstborn. The sister wrote, without this order, I am next. Some think that the accident in California triggered a severe mental break. Others, however, aren't sure. They all agree on one thing though, that what happened to Trudy was unthinkable. But now they're left with two haunting questions. What really happened inside that house? And what mental state was Torolina Fields in when she did it? As of now, no sentencing has taken place. Torolina Fields remains in custody, still awaiting the results of her psychiatric evaluation. If she's found competent, she will stand trial. If not, she may never see a courtroom again. I'll update you when the case reaches its conclusion. During interrogation, the police informed this man, Thomas Perez Jr., that they had discovered his father, lifeless, and that he was now laying in the morgue. And so Thomas confessed to the murder, but nothing was as it seemed. Get ready for one of the most insane twists you have ever seen in today's dark case. Thomas Perez Jr. lived a quiet life with his father and their dog in Fontana, California. Fontana is a lively city in San Bernardino County. It's known for its friendly communities and beautiful views of the San Gabriel Mountains. It's a place where suburban charm meets urban convenience, and neighbors come together for local events and activities, and they have each other's backs. But for a few of its residents, their world was about to come crashing down. On August 7th, 2018, Thomas Jr. was getting ready for bed when he noticed that his father, called Papa Tom, hadn't returned from his evening walk with their dog, Margosha, otherwise known as Margot. The pair had an argument prior to his walk. Papa Tom went out to cool off and give the two of them some space. It was now nearly 10 p.m. and the streets were quiet. In fact, eerily quiet. Suddenly, Margot came trotting back, but without Papa Tom. Her leash dangled from her collar and she seemed confused. Thomas Jr. felt a pang of worry. His father was advancing in his years, so his concern grew more quickly than it perhaps would. Initially, Thomas Jr. thought maybe his dad had run into an old friend or perhaps met someone new. However, Papa Tom didn't speak English fluently, so the chances of him getting stuck chatting to someone were probably pretty slim. As minutes turned into hours, the initial concern turned into pure anxiety. By the next morning, with no word from his father, Thomas Jr. called the Fontana Police Department to report his father missing.
Hello, this is CSOP with Fontana Police. So we're going to put him in the system right now as a missing person.
Later that day, Fontana detectives arrived at their home.
It's really concerning to me that he hasn't been back yet.
Thomas Jr. explained the situation. He mentioned the argument he had with his father the previous night, and the police seemed particularly interested in this detail. They latched onto this possible motive, keeping it in their back pocket should some more nefarious evidence come up later. Officers asked to look around the house. Soon they discovered Papa Tom's wallet and phone. Surely he wouldn't have left home without these essential items. But the next finding would turn the investigation on its head. Police found bloodstains. This discovery turned a missing person case into something far more serious. Thomas's anxiety skyrocketed. He felt the growing weight of suspicion, and detectives now took him to the police station for further questioning. Over the next 17 hours, his world would unfurl around him. He would come to realize what he had done. The police officers found Thomas to seem distracted and unconcerned. This raised more red flags for them immediately. They now moved the conversation into a stark interrogation room, and detectives dropped their first bombshell. They told Thomas his father was no longer alive, and more than that, they accused him of murder.
It did happen, Thomas. Oh, God. It did happen. You killed him, and he's dead.
I don't have any
idea. No, you do. Right there. You do. Yeah, you do.
They insisted that there was red bodily fluids all over the house that they shared. It was even on the paws of Papa Tom's dog, Margot.
You murdered your dad.
No, I did
Yes,
not.
you did.
Yeah,
Yes.
Daddy's dead because of you.
No.
Yes, not only that, but poor Morgan here.
Margot.
Sorry, Margot had to witness it.
Yep. I walked through the blood.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Yes.
Officers pushed Thomas to confess. Thomas repeatedly denied any involvement in what had happened to his father that he hadn't even had a chance to begin grieving for. He told police again and again that they were wrong, but the officers didn't relent.
No,
What happened? What happened in the house?
It's so horrible. No. Oh, God, no.
She's fine.
Officers even denied him access to his essential medications. These medications were to treat his depression, stress, asthma, and high blood pressure. But Thomas wouldn't crack.
Are you gonna bring me my doctor? You won't take me to the ER?
You don't need to go to the ER.
He wouldn't tell the police just what he had done. He refused to admit to the allegations being pushed onto him. So the detectives' tactics grew more aggressive. In a cruel twist, officers brought dog Margot into the interrogation room.
You killed him, and he's dead. And your dog is sitting here looking at you, knowing that you killed your dad.
They claimed that she was traumatized from witnessing this alleged crime. So traumatized that now she would need to be euthanized. They forced Thomas to say goodbye to his dog, adding more pressure, adding more emotional strain just to get that confession. In a heartbreaking moment captured on video, Thomas laid on the floor beside Margot, forced to contemplate losing his beloved companion. After hours of pressure, they began talking about Thomas's medication, suggesting it had clouded his memory and led to his father's disappearance, that he was responsible, and they persisted, pushing Thomas to take them to his father's body.
It's so horrible. God, no.
After
These officers ignored their subject's worsening condition and pleas for medical help. Instead, they just intensified their accusations. Desperate to secure a confession, police enlisted a family friend, Carl Peraza, to coax an admission from Thomas. Peraza initially couldn't believe the accusations against his friend, knowing him only as a gentle person with a close bond to his father. Police, however, convinced him they had overwhelming evidence against Thomas Perez Jr.
They got you on murder, dude. They got you on murder. Impossible. Doing good.
Alone with Perez in the interrogation room, Peraza attempted to persuade him to confess. As the interrogation dragged on, Thomas's mental state deteriorated rapidly. Deprived of his medications and bombarded with accusations, he began to crack, now ready to admit what the police wanted him to say. This was a pressure cooker situation, an intense interrogation where police were using every trick in the book, and eventually Thomas confessed to ending his own father.
Did you stab him?
I didn't think that I did.
But if you did, where would you have stabbed him?
It might have been the belly.
Officers then left Thomas alone with his thoughts, trapped inside the room. It was then that he attempted to end his own time on this earth. He made this attempt using a leather lace from his shoe, but fortunately it snapped and his life was saved. Fontana police escalated their investigation. Thomas's confession meant that the authorities could now search his home, and that is exactly what they did. They tore apart the house in a frantic search for evidence. They slashed furniture, damaged property, and also employed some questionable methods, like using a non-official cadaver dog, along with a potentially unreliable blood detection chemical. But despite these efforts, no concrete evidence of a crime emerged. But police still had the confession. However, this confession would do little when an unbelievable twist shatters everything we thought we knew about this case. Fontana police contacted Thomas's sister, and she shared the news that their father, Papa Tom, was in fact alive and well. He had simply travelled without notifying Perez, visiting friends and preparing to catch a flight to Oakland. It seems he just had enough after the argument. This revelation burned the police's baseless accusations to the ground, and it lay exposed the flawed assumptions that had driven Perez to the brink and beyond. Thomas Jr. was in fact lucky to be alive following their actions. Absolutely unbelievably, even after confirming his father's safety, police subjected Thomas to further trauma. They detained him under a psychiatric hold known as a 5150, claiming he posed a danger to himself or others. He was forcibly hospitalized, isolated from communication, and you might think that this is fair enough considering his previous attempt on himself. However, during this time, he was kept unaware that his father was still alive, held against his will, believing that he had ended his father. He didn't find out the truth until days later when he was finally released. Carl Peraza, the man that had helped convince Thomas of his alleged crime, and who had witnessed the devastation inflicted on Thomas firsthand, eventually took his friend home to reunite with his father and Margot the dog. A dog who, thank goodness, had narrowly escaped euthanasia. The emotional toll on Thomas, his father and Peraza was profound. They all now struggle to comprehend and recover from the nightmare inflicted upon them by the Fontana police. 6 days after Thomas Perez Jr. first contacted Fontana police to report his father missing, and 4 days after his father was found alive, the police department sought yet another search warrant. This time they aimed to place a GPS tracker on Thomas's car, suggesting without evidence that a third party might have been the victim of a homicide. Jeffrey Noble, a seasoned expert witness and former deputy police officer, heavily criticised this move, stating that no reasonable officer would have seen it as justified under the circumstances. Despite their persistent efforts to uncover any evidence of a crime, the searches yielded nothing incriminating, prompting them to abandon their fruitless pursuit. Thomas was being persecuted for absolutely no reason, apart from perhaps that the police force had embarrassed themselves, and, in my opinion, potentially wanted to inflict revenge to quell their blushing cheeks. Frustrated and desperate to clear his name, Thomas decided to pursue legal action against the Fontana Police Department, a challenging endeavour given the broad protections afforded to officers under qualified immunity laws in the United States. During court proceedings, Fontana police officers defended their actions, claiming they were following standard procedures and training protocols. They argued that their use of deceptive tactics during the interrogation was indeed permissible under the law and department policies. This included misleading Perez about the strength of the evidence against him and manipulating the truth to pressure a confession. Steering emphasized that in his 4 decades of legal practice, he had never encountered such egregious mistreatment by law enforcement. And all of this didn't have to happen. Papa Tom was safe all along. If the police hadn't have contacted his sister after 17 hours of relentless interrogation, they would not have discovered that his father had visited a female friend in El Monte and then travelled to Los Angeles International Airport to catch a flight to Northern California. This revelation, this truth, starkly contrasted with the narrative spun by the police that they pushed as reality during the interrogation. Fontana officials responding to public scrutiny defended their officers' actions, claiming that they had reason to suspect Thomas, and this was based on evidence like bloodstains and a cadaver dog's alert. They denied allegations of harsh interrogation tactics, stating that Thomas Perez Jr. was not isolated for 17 hours and he was provided breaks and food. However, a closer examination of the interrogation paints a different picture. Thomas's legal team, through depositions and evidence from the investigation, raised serious concerns about their client's treatment and the risks faced by anyone accused of a crime, guilty or not. Finally, nearly 6 years after these traumatic events unfolded, the city of Fontana reached a settlement agreement with Thomas. They agreed to pay him $900,000 to resolve his federal lawsuit, which alleged mistreatment during his interrogation. Alyssa Dayvolt had always loved makeup. When she was little, she'd try out her mum's lipstick in a mirror, tracing red over her lips and smudging the edges. She'd apply her eyeliner too, drawing shaky black lines across her eyelids. And when her mum caught her, she smiled at the image of a little girl in front of the mirror, simply playing. As Alyssa got older, her mum taught her how to apply the makeup properly, how to blend in foundation, how to do a winged eye, how to create drama with coloured eyeshadows. And Alyssa loved experimenting as a teenager. She would use makeup to create different looks. She became known for her creativity, especially as people started to request her to do their makeup. Alyssa would take her brushes and apply striking eye makeup to her friends, drawing bold, bright shapes trailing from their eyes. So it was no surprise to anyone that Alyssa started to train as a makeup artist, something she did as soon as she was finally old enough. And she excelled on the course, coming top of her class repeatedly. And so Alyssa started making videos of her makeup creations. At first she filmed casually and mostly for herself, simply so she could keep improving on her skills. But one day a friend convinced her to post a video to YouTube, and so she did. Alyssa thought nothing would come out of it, but she also realised she had nothing to lose, so why not just give it a try? When the video was posted, people immediately started commenting and liking. And so, inspired, Alyssa decided to try uploading a new vlog each week. And slowly but surely, not only her makeup bag, but also her following grew and grew. It allowed Alyssa to stay in her hometown of North Myrtle Beach, a beautiful city in South Carolina down on the coast. She'd always loved the city that she grew up in, and so she felt lucky that she could build her business completely online, aiming for that freedom of time and freedom of location. People were drawn to Alyssa's creativity, but also practical day-to-day tips. Her mum was so proud of her daughter's success. She would talk about Alyssa's YouTube channel any chance she could get. She'd think back to all those moments when Alyssa was small, when her interest in makeup had only just started. All of Alyssa's hard work allowed her to move into a beautiful home. It was bright and clean and light flooded in through the windows. People could see her success in her videos. Just when things seemed like they couldn't be going any better for Alyssa, she met Chris. The two of them got on immediately, talking about their shared upbringing in Myrtle Beach, their passions and how they love to spend their free time. Soon they started to spend as much of that free time together as they possibly could. They'd drive down to the beach and go for long walks where they'd talk about their future that they were going to build together. Chris and Alyssa were inseparable, and this meant they couldn't be happier when they found out that Alyssa was in fact pregnant. She continued to film throughout her pregnancy. Her happiness made her glow as she walked her viewers through her latest makeup advice. And then she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. The happy couple felt like everything they'd been hoping for had finally happened. Together, they settled into the rhythm of new parenthood, and this meant Alyssa changed the style of her content, but only slightly. She now focused on how to apply makeup quickly when time was short, and how to hide dark circles effectively from those sleepless nights. She gained even more followers as her videos got better and better, and a lot of these newcomers were parents who appreciated her practical advice. Alyssa and Chris would take the same drives that they had done when they were dating, travelling on down to the beach, but now they would take their daughter too. Family days out now replaced the couple's date nights. Together they'd sit as a three, watching the sunset, their daughter's tiny feet kicking in the sand. But the family of three wouldn't stay that way for very long. Alyssa couldn't believe it when she found out she was pregnant for a second time. It still seemed so close to the first pregnancy, and so the family grew once more. They had another daughter, and life went on. Her first daughter had started to do the same as Alyssa had done when she was younger, watch her mum when she applied her makeup. Alyssa would quietly smile when she saw this. Happy patterns repeating themselves. In a small way, it's the circle of life in action. It seemed to outsiders that Alyssa had the perfect life. She turned 30 and celebrated with her family. And on her channel, she shared easy birthday makeup ideas, smiling as she taught viewers how to still feel dressy but without too much effort. But the truth was, on the inside, Alyssa was feeling torn. She'd found out that she was now pregnant for a third time. And inside, Alyssa secretly doubted whether she'd be able to have a third child. Her life felt so full and happy with her two daughters and Chris, and she couldn't quite imagine what the new dynamic would be like with three of them, or even thinking of whether they'd have to move so they could have more space. Things were going well. She didn't want to rock the boat, so at first, she didn't tell Chris. And this deception wasn't as hard as you may think. As the months passed by, Alyssa didn't really start to show. It had been the same with her two daughters before. It had sometimes been difficult to tell that she was pregnant at all. She continued to film for her channel as she always had, and no one suspected anything different as Alyssa had only ever filmed from the neck up. The tension within herself grew. She was waiting for the perfect moment to tell Chris, but that moment didn't seem to come. In fact, that moment seemed to have long passed. But she knew she needed to say something. However, time was pressing on. The moment never arrived, and the doubts that were creeping in never stopped. They only grew. In fact, Alyssa's entire pregnancy passed without her saying anything at all. Much like the life growing inside of her, so was the secret. Alyssa started to get more and more scared. The life she knew and loved seemed to be hanging in the balance. Then, one night when Chris was away, Alyssa found herself in excruciating pain. She knew from her experience with her previous daughters that she was having contractions. The third baby was coming. There was no hiding from that fact. It was late at night and her daughters were asleep in the other room. She started to cry, knowing she'd be delivering the baby alone. During the pregnancy, she'd only attended one hospital appointment, and nobody in her family, nobody in her life knew that she was expecting. Outside, the night was surprisingly cool for South Carolina, even in November. In the early hours of the morning, Alyssa gave birth to a baby girl. But this time, rather than showing her straight away to Chris, or taking the baby to the hospital to be checked, or indeed thinking of the family trips this girl would join with them to the beach, Alyssa did something completely unimaginable. She took the tiny body and held her for only the briefest second, and then with her umbilical cord still around her neck, threw her into a trash bag. Alyssa ignored the cries for help. Everything soon turned quiet, so she walked outside with the bag and then put her in a garbage can situated by their house. Alyssa dropped the bag inside and then clanged the lid shut. She pushed any thoughts of feelings of guilt or love away, and instead thought of how the trash would be collected the next morning, and then no one would ever know or suspect what was in there. Alyssa saw Chris a little less frequently right after the birth. She felt detached from the horrors of what she'd done, and she tried to act normally, but a few months later, she found out that she was pregnant again. Alyssa felt the same as she had with her third daughter, completely numb. But now she also felt emboldened. She'd done it once before. She knew that she could do it again, and she wouldn't get caught. Alyssa went through with the pregnancy the same way that she had with the third, in complete and utter secrecy. But unlike the previous pregnancy, she knew this time exactly how it would end, exactly how she would end it. When Alyssa went into labour in December of 2018, she was midway through filming new content. She stopped and deleted the video, unsure if the sudden pain she was feeling was too obvious on her face. Alyssa was scared to do this on her own again, and as soon as she started to deliver the baby, something in her body didn't feel right. This time she felt a tear. Even so, this didn't stop her plan. As soon as she completed the delivery, her son this time, she put him in a bag. Later, police would find meconium, an expulsion that babies produce when they are born, inside of the trash bag. This meant that he was still alive when the bag was closed. Alyssa took the same fateful walk that she had done before, out of the house and over to the trash can. 2 days later, Alyssa was in excruciating pain. The tear caused by her labour had become infected. Alyssa was blacking out, dizzy and disorientated from the infection. She finally accepted that she'd have to go into the Grand Strand Regional Hospital, and whilst there, she planned not to tell anyone anything. She arrived and made complaints of heavy bleeding, but when the doctors saw her, they immediately said that she needed a blood transfusion. They weren't expecting to find anything else, but then they made the shocking discovery. Alyssa had an undeliverable placenta and umbilical cord in her uterus. That would only be possible if she'd recently given birth. "Where's the baby?" they asked her, and Alyssa couldn't answer, even when they asked her again and again, pushing her for an answer that she wasn't willing to give. The hospital staff immediately called the police. They quickly arrived at Alyssa's hospital bed. They started questioning her immediately in a recorded post-Miranda interview. They were extremely concerned where the baby was and if he was safe, but they could never have known that this was the second time Alyssa had done this.
When you went to the emergency room the other day, the doctors and the nurses are saying that at some point prior to you going to the emergency room, you were pregnant with a baby.
I was not pregnant. I don't know what else to say. Like, I don't have a baby that passed out of me. I don't know how to explain it to you. Like, I would know if I had a baby. What happened to that baby? I don't know. Okay, well, listen to me. Listen, look at me. You're going to have to look at me, okay? Look at me. When everybody freaks out, okay? Where did you put the baby?
Who's the father?
Oh, you and Chris's dad.
You couldn't tell her you were gaining weight or anything like that?
I mean, you knew that I was gaining a little bit of weight. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't. I don't have an explanation. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't. I was too scared to tell anybody that I was pregnant. I was horrified. I was scared. I can't believe I did this. Were they both in the bathroom? Yes, ma'am. And the other one went into the trash as well.
Initially, she denied ever having been pregnant, but then soon afterwards, sobbing, she confessed that she put her son in a trash bag. Police went to Alyssa's house to carry out a search, and there they found not only her son, but also medical records from the previous year. From that one time that she had visited a doctor, the record said that Alyssa was in the 3rd trimester of her pregnancy. Horrified, police looked at each other. They figured out that Alyssa had done this before, and until now, gotten away with it. When Alyssa went home on bail from the hospital, the house was empty. She was no longer allowed contact with her daughters. Partner Chris was speechless, too devastated for words. It feels like the biggest betrayal, he said. He couldn't comprehend how his perfect life with Alyssa had all just been a lie. A court date was set and the trial began, but one thing was missing: Alyssa. She refused to appear. However, the trial still went ahead in her absence. It lasted for just 4 days. As former partner Chris heard the evidence from the prosecution, he kept thinking of his 2 helpless children. Both of them he would never know. He and his family felt numb from hearing the details of what his partner had done. The jury verdict came back on October the 15th. Alyssa now had to be present in court for her sentencing. Shaking, Chris looked at this woman, the mother of his children, all 4 of them. A woman who now seemed like a complete stranger, a complete monster. We find the defendant, Alyssa Dayvold, guilty of 2 counts of homicide by child abuse. The representative from the jury said, Chris received some sense of relief that justice at least was delivered. Alyssa heard the sentencing. She had received 40 years. As it was read out, she thought back to her early memories with her mother, and with her own 2 daughters, the ones that still lived, the ones that would occasionally join her on her channel in brief videos, thinking how much they loved to watch her, how much they admired her, and how everything she built, everything she loved, had now been lost, and it was all because of her own vile decisions. Chris watched her as she was escorted out in handcuffs. He knew she'd more than likely spend the rest of her life in prison. It's hard to think of any true justice for what Alyssa did, but being locked away with her thoughts will hopefully be punishment enough. The front porch looked like it belonged on a postcard. White picket fence, a holiday wreath still clinging to the door, but no one had seen a Tote family in weeks. Inside the carefully planned town of Celebration, Disney's blueprint for a suburban utopia, mail piled up, a deadbolt stayed locked, and vague messages trickled out to friends and relatives. We're all sick, just resting. We're going off grid for a bit. Then came the eviction notice. When agents arrived on January the 13th, 2020, it was supposed to be about health insurance fraud, a routine arrest. Instead, looking ashen and shaking, he muttered that his wife was asleep and the kids were out at a sleepover. But when officers pushed inside the 2-story home, all hell broke loose. Before the headlines, before the courtroom breakdowns and conflicting confessions, Anthony Tote was considered a model family man, a licensed physical therapist, a youth soccer coach, and a husband to Megan, his college sweetheart, as well as a father of 3 bright, musically gifted kids. In 2017, the Totes left their longtime home in Connecticut for a new start in Celebration, Florida, a community originally designed by the Walt Disney Company itself. The streets were lined with pastel houses and manicured lawns. It was the kind of place that people called storybook perfect. They rented a large home and bought a condo nearby. Megan homeschooled their kids, Alec 13, a budding pianist, Tyler 11, a bookworm, and Zoe 4, an energetic, curious little girl who everyone called a princess. They also had a family dog called Breezy. The family went on holidays. They posted smiling photos, and everything looked idyllic from the outside. Anthony still commuted back to Connecticut during the week in order to run his physical therapy practice. On weekends, he coached soccer, and he led an active role in his kids' lives. But that double life, commuter dad, long-distance business owner, Disney neighbor, was starting to crack. Debt was mounting. Anthony had taken out multiple high-interest loans, totaling more than a horrendous $200,000, an amount that actually makes me feel physically sick. I mean, can you even begin to imagine that? Horrible. Anthony was understandably being sued by lenders, and in April of 2019, federal investigators opened a case against him for fraud. He was accused of billing insurance companies for treatments that he never actually performed, what are called ghost appointments. These are fake sessions, but he would get real payouts for them. Still, he kept this information from wife Megan. He kept the family life running like nothing at all had changed. However, that year they even stayed in Florida for the holidays, skipping their usual return north. By November, his clinic had been raided. By December, their rental home was under threat of eviction. But instead of just telling the truth, Anthony said that they were going to go on another vacation, and while they were away, they would be unreachable. But then they all but vanished. At first, no one panicked. Megan's relatives got text messages saying that the family had come down with the flu, that they were still recovering, and that they needed their rest. Some friends received vague holiday updates, but something about them didn't feel quite right. The days dragged on. Christmas came and went, and no one answered their phones, nor did they call back. And then came the eviction notice. It was pinned to their door at 202 Reserve Place. Neighbours even texted Megan about it. She replied with a short message, "We're fine, thanks." But this didn't sound like Megan. With suspicions raising, on December the 29th, police did a welfare check. Nobody answered the door, and legally they couldn't force entry. But behind the scenes, things were escalating.
A federal affidavit reveals Tote was being investigated by the FBI after they report he engaged in a healthcare fraud scheme in which he allegedly submitted fake claims to Connecticut's Medicaid program from 2015 to 2019. In the affidavit, when questioned as to the motivation for committing the fraud, authorities say Tote blamed loans and living above his means. And according to his Florida landlord, Tote owed over $6,000 in back rent and was being evicted. After not hearing from Tote for some time, federal agents reached out to a Connecticut relative who said she too was having a hard time contacting the family, according to the affidavit. She then reached out to the Osceola County Sheriff's Office. They did a well-being check at their home, but say they didn't find anything suspicious.
Federal agents from the Department of Health and Human Services were busy still building their fraud case against Anthony Tote. They now had a warrant for his arrest. On January the 13th, 2020, but this time with deputies from the Osceola County Sheriff's Office. Mail was now stacked high on the porch. The same Christmas decorations still hung untouched. This time, the front door creaked open. Anthony stood there, swaying slightly. He looked pale. He said the kids were on a sleepover, said that Megan was upstairs, sleeping. He even turned his head and called her name, as if he was expecting her to answer, but she didn't. Deputies entered the house. There was an immediate, overwhelming stench of death. It wouldn't take long to discover the source, and I'll warn you, the truth is really very disturbing. In the master bedroom, they found 5 bodies. Megan, Alec, Tyler, Zoe, and the family dog, Breezy. They were wrapped in blankets, positioned together. They were far gone enough that it was hard to even tell who was who. Zoe had been hidden beneath her mother's legs. A crucifix was found clutched in one hand. Bottles of Benadryl were strewn across the floor.
Members of the community still shocked at everything that has unfolded.
I ran into Tony now and then. But this is just a total shock.
It's shocking. It's sad. It's awful.
Tote is now facing 4 counts of murder and 1 count of animal cruelty and is being held in police custody without bond. Live in Colchester tonight, Zania Maldonado, Fox 61 News.
Anthony Tote was immediately taken into custody. He too had Benadryl in his own system, but it wasn't enough to end him. And when he began to speak, what he told investigators was worse than anything they could have imagined. Here is some of that real body cam footage of the events I just described.
What's up? Oh, you good? You got any weapons on you? Alright. Any needles? No knives, nothing like that? No. Okay. What's your wife's name?
Megan.
Has anyone heard her talk? No. Megan?
Megan.
come on down, buddy. All right. Yep. All right, just sit, have a seat. You good? I got you. Just have a seat. Megan, face forward for me, all right? Put your hands forward too, all right?
Megan?
One 24-011. You can be 51 over here. I believe we got 2 single 7.
All right, okay. You want me to get a chair for you to sit down in? What's that? Hey, can you run out there and grab some gloves? We got it.
We still can't find the daughter.
What?
Where's Zoe?
I haven't seen her. She's on the do. Oh, no, I didn't see her. I was sleeping. She was in here. I haven't seen her. You think I'll have to check the garage.
When investigators sat down with Anthony Todt after his arrest, he didn't act like a man who had just lost his family. He rambled, he mumbled, he described a spiritual mission. He claimed that Megan had long suffered from chronic Lyme disease, that she'd grown depressed after a miscarriage, and that she'd recently become obsessed with the idea of reincarnation and the idea of an impending apocalypse. According to Anthony, Megan believed their family had bad karma and that they needed to burn it away by passing altogether. He said she convinced him that if they did, that their souls would ascend to a better life if they just left the physical world behind. Anthony told detectives that they sat down and talked it through with their children. He claims that the children agreed, that they said, "We want to die with you." The plan was to use Benadryl to sedate the children peacefully and then carry out the rest of the plan using sharp implements. Anthony said that Zoe was first. He gave her the medicine and lay down next to her for hours. Eventually, he placed a pillow over her face, and then came Tyler and Alec. He said he sedated them too, then suffocated them, and then used the sharp implement on them. When it came time for Megan, Anthony claimed that she tried to jab herself in the abdomen, that she drank more Benadryl, but it didn't have the desired effect. He said that she begged him to finish it for her, so that's exactly what he did. Afterwards, he says he arranged the bodies in the bedroom. He placed a crucifix in their hands, and then, according to him, he wanted to end his own time too. So he too took Benadryl, but not enough. He said that he couldn't bring himself to use the sharp implement on himself. He claims he passed out, woke up again, and then just wandered around the house. He never called for help, but he did leave the house to buy alcohol. He also checked the mail, and he even went out for fast food once or twice. And he says before he knew it, 3 weeks had passed, and all that time he continued living in the house with his family. He simply covered them in blankets and kept the doors shut. To the outside world, they were simply away on vacation. Everyone was still recovering from the flu. However, Anthony Todt claimed that they were in fact on a path to rebirth. 2 days after his arrest, Anthony Todt's story started to change though. The calm conviction he'd once shown when describing the pact now began to crack. Now he said that he hadn't been involved at all. He claimed that when he returned home, he found that the children were already gone, that Megan had poisoned them, spiking their pudding with Benadryl, and then using the sharp implement. He said she'd then done the same to herself. He told detectives he ran to the bathroom and then vomited when he saw what she'd done, that he was too weak to do anything else. However, investigators just weren't buying it. His initial confession had been graphic and specific, and it was consistent with the physical evidence found at the scene. He knew the order in which everyone had passed, and he also knew that Megan hadn't managed to jab herself fatally, that her wounds were only really superficial. So, self-inflicted or not, they wouldn't have been enough to end her time. Prosecutors also pointed to his behaviour in the days and weeks that followed. He'd used his family's phones to send fake text messages. He'd told relatives that they were all sick, that they were going on holiday, and that they wouldn't be in contact. He had taken deliberate steps to maintain the illusion of normalcy long after the family were gone. When asked why he didn't call 911, even if it was Megan that had done it, he had no real answer. He talked about being confused, about being overwhelmed and emotionally shattered. During this time, he also continued using money that he'd gained from fraudulent insurance claims, and he had done nothing to preserve the dignity of the people that he claimed to love. At one point, he suggested that maybe he had blacked out and done it, but then he retracted that statement. Then he just blamed Megan again. In jail, he wrote a 27-page letter to his estranged father, Robert Tote. And we're going to have to take a short detour here, because Robert and Anthony may actually have a few things in common. The real story of Anthony Tote doesn't begin in Celebration, Florida. It begins in Pennsylvania in 1980. Back then, Anthony was just 4 years old. That year, his father, Robert Tote, was arrested for hiring a former student to end Anthony's mother, Loretta. Robert was a high school wrestling coach and a special education teacher. He paid a 19-year-old with learning difficulties just $800 to pull the trigger on Loretta while she slept. His motive for doing this? He wanted to marry his mistress. Anthony, along with his younger sister, were in the house that night. Robert would later say that his son saw the guy, saw the gun, saw everything. Miraculously, Loretta actually survived the attack. However, she lost her left eye. She eventually remarried and rebuilt her life. Robert Tote was convicted, but he served just 5 years in prison. 2 questions: what and how? After his release, he and Anthony didn't speak for years, but by 2020, in the wake of Anthony's own arrest, they had reconnected, and Robert defended his son. He said that the case didn't make a whole lot of sense, that Anthony had been mistreated by the justice system, that his confessions shouldn't have been used against him, but to prosecutors, the parallels were chilling. 2 generations, 2 fathers, 2 families destroyed from the inside out.
Investigators claim after his arrest, Anthony Tote confessed to killing his wife, 3 children, and the family dog. But now Tote is telling a different story. Jail phone calls obtained by WESH 2 News record Tote telling his sister he was not present when his family was killed. He also implies his wife, Megan, was the real killer and that it wasn't her first attempt.
Didn't stop this because I wasn't there.
I know, I know, and I get what you're saying. I'm just saying, this is awesome.
Attempts, just so you know.
Huh?
Multiple attempts in the last.
Tote made similar claims in a letter to his father in June. He said his wife was the one who drugged the children, stabbed and suffocated them, and then stabbed herself. In the phone call with his sister, Tote claims his family meant everything to him.
I'm still madly in love with her. I'm still madly in love with the kids.
Tote is being held at the Osceola County Jail. Amanda Dukes reporting, WESH 2 News.
Anthony Tote may have become a father himself, but the legacy he carried was already soaked in betrayal, secrets, and a terrible familial violence. In the letter to Father Robert, Anthony laid out yet another version of events. He said that Megan ended the kid's time while he slept, and she then passed by her own hand. He told his father to keep it confidential. However, I'm not making any accusations, but somehow this letter to Robert was leaked to the press. So prosecutors now had at least 3 different stories from Anthony Tote, but only one of them matched the crime scene. When the trial began in April of 2022, the media dubbed him the Disney Dad, the man who had posed with his kids in front of fairy tale castles and then lived in their family home for weeks while their bodies decomposed upstairs. Anthony Tote pleaded not guilty on all charges. He insisted, again, that Megan was responsible, that he hadn't harmed anyone. On the stand, he cried often. He spoke about Megan's chronic Lyme disease, about her depression, about her spiritual beliefs, telling the court that his wife's fixation on reincarnation came about after a miscarriage. He said that she had ended the family's time on this earth in a moment of despair. He claims that he lied in his original confession in order to protect his wife's legacy. I was covering for my wife, he told the jury. I didn't want anyone to actually think badly of her, that his confessions had been coerced, that he was in a Benadrylled up, disorientated state. They pointed out that the bodies were too decomposed to determine the exact causes of their demise. They said that the state couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that he was the one responsible. However, the prosecution was prepared. They played Anthony's videotaped confession in full. He had confessed twice, once just after his arrest, and again 2 days later. In those recordings, his voice was steady. It was clear and emotionless. He described how he'd given each child the Benadryl, how he'd gone from room to room, and done the deed. He said that Megan had begged him to help her after her own failed attempt on herself, so he did.
I loved my wife. I loved my children. I was not there the night my children died. The kids and my wife woke up. The Friday before all this happened, we got in a disagreement, and I begged her to go get help because she screamed at my son because he didn't do the pot, clean the pot. He let it soak per my instructions. This has been a progressive history since the miscarriage. Her anger issues, her frustration issues, and it was directed mostly at me. And I took it. It's okay, because she held me partly responsible for getting her sick initially because I insisted she went to the hospital. I told her after she finally decided to schedule a doctor's appointment on the Thursday after Thanksgiving, she canceled it. I found that out the night before. When she screamed at Tyler, the Friday the 13th, I told her that she has to the end of the month to see a doctor because she went to the alternative and spiritual and all this other route. Or I would get her aunt and my sister involved. After that, she once again held it quiet in public. Okay? She was very good at keeping it from the public.
Prosecutors asked, if Megan really did all of this, why didn't Anthony call the police? Why lie to everyone for weeks? Why conceal the bodies? And why send the fake messages? The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. They came back with a unanimous verdict. Guilty on 4 counts of first-degree murder. Guilty of animal cruelty. And finally, they rejected every version of his story. On sentencing day, the courtroom was silent. Megan's aunt Cynthia spoke through tears. She described Megan as having a giving heart. She said that Alec had wanted to play violin. Tyler dreamed of learning folk guitar. She called Zoe a princess. When Anthony stood to speak, he shook his head. I loved my wife. I loved my kids, he said. They were first and foremost in my life. I did not do this. However, Judge Keith Carston wasn't swayed. You, Anthony Tote, he said slowly, are the destroyer of worlds. He handed down 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He also added 1 more year for Breezy, the family dog. Anthony showed no real reaction. The court recessed. And with that, the man who once promised to build a magical future inside Disney's ideal town was now serving the rest of his life in a prison hundreds of miles away. Not quite the dream that he was selling. The front door was locked. There were no sounds, no signs of life, and something just wasn't right. Out-of-state relatives hadn't heard from 20-year-old Alyssa Shippey in months. In fact, not since November. It was now nearly summer. So on a warm afternoon in May of 2025, Broken Arrow police served a search warrant at a small home on West Roanoke Street. What they found inside would leave attending officers needing intense therapy for years to come.
Daddy.
In 2021, Rodney and Lisa Shippey bought their family home on West Roanoke Street. It was modest, one story, plain sidings, and a backyard that was just big enough. Lisa worked in the school system, and Rodney had a steady job too. And despite the challenges of raising 2 kids, one of whom had significant needs, neighbours say that they seemed like a loving and normal family. Alyssa was in her late teens, and Logan was just starting to communicate non-verbally by using gestures and videos. He had a YouTube account where he posted clips of garage doors opening and closing, and this was just his favourite thing in the world. It's kind of irrelevant now, but when I find information, I'd like to share it. Rodney also had a YouTube account with just one video on it. It was uploaded on January the 9th, 2015, and it was from a Katy Perry concert. I didn't really have him down as a Katy Perry fan, but there we go. I want to talk more about Lisa and the dynamics within their Shippey house to try and understand the conditions that could have combined and then led her to do what she eventually did. It is kind of tough because there's no clear first-hand record and there's no note from Lisa, but there are some very possible factors at play. Those closest to Lisa have said that she'd been struggling with depression for a long time, and raising Logan was not easy. And believe me, I am in no way laying on any level, not a single ounce of responsibility at Logan's door, but I have compiled a little research of what a situation like this could be like. Raising a non-verbal autistic child can present profound challenges. According to the NHS, children on the autism spectrum often use limited or no speech, and rely on alternate communications, things like gestures or speaking devices. And we know that Logan fits this diagnosis. Without adequate support, the child may experience severe anxiety and meltdowns, often seen when overwhelmed, a situation that isn't easy for the caregivers. They're often bound to consistent routines and keeping certain sensory conditions. And in this instance, in this home, Lisa was struggling. And if Lisa was struggling, things could snowball very quickly. Logan was nonverbal, he had autism, and he needed near constant supervision, a situation that would be tough for anyone, even if they were in perfect mental health. And Lisa did 100% totally adore him, but it was still exhausting. This video from March 2022, taken from Logan's YouTube channel, I believe features Lisa having a discussion with another woman about how they were handling Logan's non-verbal communication. It sounds like they were really trying to help him out.
Well, maybe the psychologist or whoever he's seeing, the therapist said, let him reply to some of your things. Don't.
Yeah. And Ronnie took the initiative yesterday, well, because I told him to, but he took the initiative to text him first, and then everything after that was Ronnie.
And also thrown into the mix was the rest of the family too. Alyssa was nearing adulthood, and she was trying to carve out her own life while still helping out at home. But perhaps Lisa was receiving less help than normal from Alyssa, but again, this is nobody's fault. We can just imagine that it was a tough situation. Something else I'm sure didn't help was the fact that Rodney worked long hours. Sometimes he would leave Lisa to juggle both kids on her own. And let's not rule out just how difficult a teenager can sometimes be. And so, behind closed doors, those pressures mounted. And in August of 2022, something sadly broke. Lisa ended her own time on this earth, in the very same home where Logan had played with toys on the carpet, where Alyssa had decorated her room with posters and fairy lights, where husband Rodney had kissed his wife goodbye for the last time and didn't even know it. Lisa's demise was the first major blow to the family, but what followed was a slow descent that nobody outside of the home could have fully seen. Rodney didn't just collapse overnight. To co-workers and neighbours, he still seemed functional. But family members did notice a change. He stopped answering text messages. He began giving vague updates about how the kids were doing. And when he did talk to people, his tone was now flat. Alyssa had been taking online classes, but she withdrew. She told a few people that she just needed a break. No one knew that break would stretch into an ongoing silence. And Logan, once visible in the yard or going on walks with his father, was now almost never seen at all. The house grew quiet, almost too quiet, and the grief, rather than fading, it seemed to harden. Rodney began pushing everyone away, perhaps trying to protect what little he had left. But isolation made nobody in that house safer. It only made what would come next invisible. Things only got worse. 5 months after Lisa's end, another tragedy struck the family. This time it was Lisa's mother, Diane Carpenter. In January of 2023, police were called to her home in South Broken Arrow after someone reported a disturbance. When they arrived, they found Diane in the kitchen. She was no longer breathing after a sharp force attack. Her husband, Kenny, had barricaded himself inside the home. He refused to come out. Officers tried to negotiate, and this standoff lasted for 4 hours. However, it ended with a single shot. Kenny now ended his own time on this earth as well. On January the 21st, 2023, Alyssa posted to Facebook, "I miss you, Grandma." Now within the space of just 5 months, Alyssa and Logan had lost both their mother and their grandparents. Rodney had lost his wife and his in-laws. The psychological fallout was heavy, and now all of the weight of the family fell on his shoulders. Rodney reportedly never spoke of Diane's death again. Family say he distanced himself even further. He made no memorial posts. He wrote no obituary. It was as if the family was disappearing one person at a time. They were disappearing from the outside world and also from memory as they further closed off. By the spring of 2023, Rodney and the kids were still in the West Roanoke home. However, the lights were now mostly off. The windows pretty much stayed closed, and whatever was happening inside, nobody would know until it was far too late. Logan Shippey wasn't a boy that many people knew by name, but if you lived on West Roanoke, you would know of him. He was the kid who loved to visit neighbours' driveways, just to watch their garage doors go up and down. He didn't talk. He didn't knock at people's doors. He just stood there mesmerised. Some people found it odd at first, but once they realised who he was, most welcomed him in. One neighbour even installed a smart opener so that Logan could trigger it whenever he wanted with a phone app. He'd smile when the doors moved. He'd film it and then watch it again and again. He even had a small YouTube channel, and it mostly featured videos of garage doors and some silent tours of places that he found interesting. But sometime after his mother passed, those videos slowed down. But then in early 2025, we got some new glimpses into the Shippey household. This video from January 2025 features both Rodney and Logan as they watch a neighbour's garage door in motion. It sounds like Rodney, at this time, was still maintaining a level of care for Logan as he mentions going home to eat.
You have a good night, Ben.
I will. Go put down.
Yeah, he's gonna go down.
Logan, come on in if you want to.
No, he's gonna go inside. He's gotta go eat too. Hi. Push the button.
Push the button.
Thank you, buddy. Yes, yes. You too.
Then in March of 2025, It was a walkthrough of the inside of his home. It was only a short video, a little shaky. It was filmed from his point of view, but what it showed alarmed his relatives. There were piles of trash, flooring seemingly torn up in parts, animals weaving throughout the home. It was clear that although the house still stood, the home had now collapsed, and nobody had been inside to see it, until that is, Logan quietly filmed it for the world. Alyssa was now 20 years old. She was bright and funny, and she was online a lot like most people her age. She loved anime and had dreams of working with animals. She last updated her Facebook profile picture on August the 8th, 2023. Her online activity slowly tailed off. She used to text with her cousin Patty every few days, but sometime in the fall of 2024, she stopped replying. Patty assumed that she was just busy, or maybe even depressed. After all, the family had been through so much, but as the months passed, concern began to grow. When people went to Rodney for answers about his daughter, he would give inconsistent answers. To one person, he said that Alyssa had moved in with some friends, and to another he said that she was dealing with health issues. One neighbour was even told that she had cancer, and Rodney even accepted money to help with her treatment for that cancer. But no one had seen Alyssa, nobody either online or in real life. Notably, Alyssa also didn't show up in any of Logan's candid videos. By March of 2025, nearly 5 months had passed without a confirmed sighting. Patty tried to reach out again, but again she got no answer. She asked some local friends to check in on the home, but nobody could get through. It was then that someone sent her Logan's most recent video. This was that video showing the interior of the home. Patty was now firmly convinced that something was very wrong.
Yeah. I could be the boss. What happened to doing? Oh my God. What you be doing? Dryer. What are you doing? Or washing? It's going out as well. He's had doors. He washes. Go back to the backyard. The story. Go over there. Go through a back door.
I'm gonna show you something. No, I'm gonna show you something right now.
You'll have the bathroom. Bathroom. We have fan. This is slippery. This beginning. I have to visit.
Okay, here we go.
This is the door. I have pantry. You look that sink, the water. We'll go over there. And have pantry more, the hammer. And then I have bedroom. You can go to a. You gotta go to the bedroom.
I knew you would.
Oh, take a picture. Okay, hold on, buddy. Let me take a picture
bedroom
real quick. Okay, I got it.
Bedroom. You see? You go closet. They have a bedroom. This go to the closet. Closet here. Take a money.
A missing persons report was finally filed in May, and not because anyone knew anything had actually happened. It was mainly because Rodney's stories were no longer being believed. Broken Arrow police attended the home on a welfare check. However, Rodney didn't answer the door. He just said that Alyssa was resting and that they didn't need anything. So instead, officers moved to get a search warrant. Logan's final upload to YouTube was on the 25th of May 2025. It's honestly just a heartbreaking watch. From my point of view, what we're seeing is a 10-year-old Logan living in squalor and trying to find methods of stimulation. The whole video is over 20 minutes long. It's almost all shot from Logan's point of view. He plays with some toys, he has some screen time, he pushes some buttons. There's a whole load of sound effects, some crude animations, and at one point he films Father Rodney. It appears Rodney is reading or typing on an iPad whilst he's sat at the kitchen table. Logan tries to get his attention, but Rodney dismisses him.
Daddy. I hate the dad. I hope you see me the good stuff.
What stands out to me about that is in the earlier videos, we hear Lisa trying to figure out how to get Logan to communicate better, and in this instance he actually uses his voice, but Rodney doesn't want to listen. I really hated watching this, and to be honest, I wish I hadn't tried so hard to find Logan's channel. And I know this is a spoiler, but what a god-awful way to spend your last days on Earth. The next update in this story is just 3 days later. And then on May the 28th, 2025, they entered the home with legal authority. What they found inside, Rodney, Logan, the family dog, was already horrifying. But it was what they missed at first, a hidden body in the corner of a dark, trash-strewn room that turned this from a crime into something far worse. This was a long silent cry for help that nobody heard in time. It seems that Rodney had many secrets, and in January of 2025, US Bank filed a foreclosure notice against Rodney for $135,000 in unpaid principal. Court documents show that he had until June to respond, but Rodney never filed, he never showed up, he never even called to try and sort it out. Nobody had any idea that the home was in foreclosure, because Rodney hadn't told anyone. From the outside, the yard did look neglected, but nobody could have guessed just how far south everything could have gone. The mailbox now filled up, deliveries sat untouched on a doorstep, and inside, a final act had already unfolded. There was no witnesses, no outreach, and nobody left to intervene. By the time police showed up for the second time, it was already over. Officers were not prepared for what they saw. Inside the home, there was no running water, there were no clean surfaces. Trash and broken furniture was now piled in nearly every room. The floors were sticky, and the air was thick with the smell of rot and pet waste. Much of the house sat in near total darkness. Investigators found Rodney first. He met his end at his own hands. He was the one that pulled the trigger, and horrifically, next to him was Logan. He was also gone. Their dog nearby was also deceased. At this time, Alyssa was still missing. It wasn't until officers returned with more lights and equipment that they realized something else was wrong. There were too many indicators, too many belongings, too much evidence, that someone else had been living in the home. And then eventually they saw it, tucked behind a collapsed pile of furniture and trash. In a dank room with no working electricity, they found a third body. It was a young woman. She was too degraded for immediate ID. However, the family already knew this was Alyssa.
Breaking news. It all started with a call from someone out of state worried about the whereabouts of their family member, Alyssa Shippey. When police showed up to this house in Broken Arrow serving a warrant, they walked in and found tragedy.
Our hearts go out to the family and friends and neighbors of the people involved in this incident this afternoon. Anytime we lose somebody in our community, it's a tragedy.
Investigators initially found 2 people and a dog all dead, calling it an apparent murder-suicide. One man who apparently shot himself, a juvenile male and a dog. Officers would not say what caused the death of the others. Later on in the investigation, they also found the dead body of a woman. They would not reveal her identity nor her cause of death. We're told investigators plan to be on scene for several more hours. Details are limited this early in the investigation, but 2 News will work tirelessly to get more. In Broken Arrow, Brody Myers, 2 News, Oklahoma.
The medical examiner would later confirm the identity. By this stage, the story had already reached the public. The home where Lisa had met her end in 2022 now held 3 more bodies. The last 3 Shippies, all gone, and all within the same 4 walls. So just to hammer this home and just to be crystal clear, the majority or possibly all of the videos that Logan recorded within the home, he did so whilst his sister was laying, decomposing in the next room. When we saw Rodney sitting at the kitchen table, he knew where Alyssa was and what state she was in. Truly, truly unthinkable.
But I spoke with family member Patty Williams, who says it is Alyssa.
This whole story is just such a tragedy on so many multiple levels.
Yeah, it's horrible. He seemed to be holding it together as best as he could, months after she passed. But then he just started to estrange himself from everybody.
Neighbors who describe Logan as autistic and nonverbal say they often saw him play outside. He loved meeting with them. But no one had seen Alyssa since at least December. Patty hadn't talked to any of them either.
It's not abnormal for Rodney to kind of distance himself from everybody. So when I didn't hear from them, I didn't think anything of it because he's done this before.
Patty and several of the neighbors tell me Logan loved garage doors. In fact, he would be out here a lot asking the neighbors if they would open and close it for them, and they did oblige. He also took a lot of YouTube videos. It was, in fact, one of his YouTube videos that alerted family to what was going on inside.
Not suitable for a child. There was no running water. There was trash in the house. The house looked like a completely different house.
Patty would later learn Rodney had been telling various stories, including telling neighbors that Alyssa had cancer.
And they would send money to help. Alyssa did not have cancer.
Patty now just wants the community to see and remember their faces of lives lost too soon.
Logan was so smart, eager to learn. Everybody that met him loved him, so he was everybody's Logan. Alyssa was such a bright person in the world, and she had such a beautiful life ahead of her, and I just feel like their lives were just stolen from them.
We don't know exactly what happened to Alyssa, and in a way I think she has the darkest story here. The Broken Arrow Police Department stated that a medical examiner would determine the official reason that her time came to an end, but as of now, no official ruling or autopsy results have been publicly released. What is strongly implied, however, based on the state of decomposition, the lack of visible trauma reports, and the home's unsanitary, abandoned-like condition, is that Alyssa must have passed months earlier, possibly from neglect, from untreated illness, possibly starvation, or maybe other non-violent causes, though again this is unconfirmed. Relatives, including Patty Williams, already believed that Rodney had been lying about Alyssa's whereabouts and condition, and we know that at one point he claimed that she had cancer, so maybe she was already ill, or maybe she was already gone. But either way, these deceptions suggest that Rodney concealed her passing for some time, either out of denial, out of mental anguish, or to avoid intervention. Hopefully in time we will get the answers, but there is a chance that the remains were already too degraded. We don't know exactly when Rodney made his decision. There were no notes found. There were no text messages sent. There were no final phone calls. But at some point, the father who had once tried to hold his family together chose to be the one to put an end to his entire family's story.
I am the chosen one, chosen by Clementine. I am guided, as Christians are guided by Jesus Christ.
He was wearing black and yellow, a costume of sorts. It was custom designed for infamy. He had chosen a date carefully, Friday the 13th. He thought it had a good name on it. The plan was chilling in its precision. He wanted to be the most hated monster of the 21st century, a monster who would be remembered forever. He wrote it all down. He rehearsed what he was going to do, and then things got even more twisted. He made a video referring to himself as the Chosen One, but he didn't claim to be chosen by God, instead by Clementine, a fictional child from a video game. But the question is, did he have it in him to pull this off? Nicholas Prosper was born in the early 2000s, and he grew up in Luton, England, on the Marsh Farm estate. And there he lived in a council flat with his mother, Juliana Falcone, younger brother Kyle, and youngest sister Giselle. Nicholas was described by former teachers as a geeky boy. He was into computers, he was quiet, and he wasn't particularly social. There were signs of isolation, and he dropped out of school before completing his A-levels. He spent most of his time alone on the internet or in the gym. By 2023, concerns were starting to build. His school and his parents had both referred him to a GP. There were suggestions that he might have undiagnosed autism, but Nicholas refused to engage with the professionals, and that was the end of that. There was no diagnosis, which meant there was no support. But behind closed doors, something was festering. Nicholas became obsessed with mass shootings. He'd read anything and everything he could find about them. He wasn't drawn to the victims though. Instead, he idolized the perpetrators. He made notes, spreadsheets, and plans. He studied Sandy Hook, Columbine, and Uvalde. He would research a number of casualties, the weapons used, the body counts. He would keep lists of the dead, and the further down the rabbit hole he went, the more his obsession grew, and now he wanted to surpass them. By late 2023, Nicholas's online life had fully taken over. Detectives would later describe it as a harmful internet world from which he would never return. He would watch really disturbing content. We're talking the stuff that most people don't even know exists. He visited websites showing people's final moments. However, he was eventually banned from one of them for making pro-PDF file comments. He also became obsessed with a fictional character. She was a little girl named Clementine, but we'll look deeper into this in a moment. Nicholas had no criminal record. He had no real-life contact with violent groups or gangs. But his mind was now fully occupied by these dark fantasies. He didn't just want his own time on this earth to come to an end. He wanted to go down in history. His plan was to end his entire family and then storm his old place of education, St. Joseph's. There he planned on snuffing out 30, before finally doing the same to himself. As I said, Nicholas didn't just isolate himself. Instead, he vanished into an online world of violence, fantasy, and deep delusion. In the months before the events in this video, his internet history was a roadmap to a dark obsession. He spent his time in the darkest corners he could find, researching horrifying things. He built dossiers on infamous killers, and he wasn't horrified by them. He wasn't studying them to try and stop people like that. Instead, he admired them. And with all of this also came a strange fixation that blurred fiction and reality. And that was Nicholas's obsession with Clementine, a child character from the Walking Dead video game series. In the game, she's smart, brave, and resourceful. She's a survivor in a brutal post-apocalyptic world. To Nicholas, she wasn't just a character, she became his spiritual guide. Honestly, this just makes me think he was more like Christian than anything else. In one video recorded shortly before the event, he said,
I am the chosen one, chosen by Clementine. I am guided, as Christians are guided by Jesus Christ.
This wasn't just something on a level of cosplay, it was a delusion wrapped in ideology, an invented mythology where he cast himself as a martyr turned monster, sanctioned by a child saviour. His fantasy world gave him purpose in the real world. To him it justified his plans. It detached him from empathy and morality, and these feelings were so powerful that they would drive him to the extremes of human behaviour.
On June 30th, my sister decided to make the only correct choices in episode 1 of season 1 of the Walking Dead games, and for that her face will be mutilated further than necessary.
Although delusional, Nicholas wasn't impulsive. His plan was more than a year in the making. He chose the date, Friday the 13th of September 2024, to maximise symbolism and shock value. In his own words, he wanted the massacre to have a good name on it. He ordered a black and yellow outfit, styled to be instantly recognisable. He even considered using a mask, but eventually decided against it. This is a video he made and posted to YouTube, and you can see he's wearing that yellow jacket and using a placeholder for a weapon. His online search history in the days before the event was horrifying. He looked up shotgun wounds, necrophilia, as well as the weather forecast, to ensure his deadly walk to his old place of education would go undisturbed. God forbid a killer should get wet. He made a booking at a shooting range in August, but he never attended. Instead, he turned to online firearm sales. Using a forged certificate, he tricked a private seller into handing over a shotgun and 100 cartridges. He claimed to be a volunteer working for a charity to earn his trust. He paid £650 for the weapon and an extra £30 for the seller's petrol. He even forged the watermark and signature on the fake certificate. But it would seem that he hadn't done enough to stop the seller from becoming suspicious, and the man did notify police of the sale. However, it would be too late. The weapon was now already in Nicholas Prosper's hands. He was now armed. He had ammunition. He had a detailed plan. And in his head, all that stood in his way were the people he lived with. It began before sunrise. The first phase of Nicholas's plan was to put an end to his mother and his siblings in their sleep. But something went wrong. Mother Juliana woke up. As if things couldn't get any more disturbing, Nicholas would later admit that he did intend to violate her, but he claimed that his mother messed it up by waking too soon. A struggle ensued and the mother screamed. Younger brother Kyle tried to hide in the kitchen, pleading for his life. Giselle hid beneath the kitchen table. However, no pleading or hiding could save them. Mother Juliana was now out the picture, and now the trigger was pulled, whilst Nicholas aimed the weapon at both of their heads. Kyle had also suffered over 100 additional sharp implement wounds. The noise of the firearm carried through the apartment block. One neighbour described hearing a strange voice, unlike anything she'd ever experienced before. She stepped outside, and then another neighbour joined her. They debated whether to call the police. They weren't quite sure what they actually had to report, but they just knew that something felt horribly wrong. Here is one of those 999 calls.
Sorry, I'm a bit rattled. Upstairs, just gone up to knock on the door, sorry. I had a massive bang, sounded like a gunshot.
Minutes later, officers forced entry into the flat, and there they found all 3 bodies of the family. Nicholas, however, was gone, vanished into the outside world. He was now walking through Luton, carrying a shotgun and more than 30 cartridges. He was heading for his next location, as planned. For Nicholas, each and every one of those cartridges had someone's name on it. Meanwhile, 2 officers were driving back to the station from the crime scene, and it was there they saw a young man walking alone. Something about his behaviour felt off. He was jittery but also purposeful. As they got closer, they noticed what looked like red spatter on his face. They stopped the car. He just kept saying, "It's not murder, it's not murder," one of the officers later recalled. They cuffed him on the spot, and nearby, hidden in a bush, they recovered the shotgun and 33 cartridges. The next stage of his planned massacre had been just moments away from happening. The police officer's instincts here saved a tragedy of unknown magnitude in the UK. Here is the available body cam footage of this arrest.
Okay, you do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention, when questioned, something today's trial in court. Anything you do say may be given as evidence. What road are we on? Birmingham Road. 426, priority. Birmingham Road, I think we've got the offender.
It's not murder.
Yes, we've got a male here. He's presented himself to us. Can we just get another unit?
In custody, Nicholas showed no signs of panic. According to officers, he was inappropriately cheerful. He even asked if, because of his actions, local schools were now in lockdown. Over the next few days, Nicholas Prosper gave multiple statements, first to a prison nurse and then later in writing, a stark contrast to his initial interview where he answered only no comment.
Did you kill them?
No comments.
Police got called there to a disturbance and found your mum, brother and sister dead. Explain to me what happened.
No comments.
Did you kill your mum, brother and sister?
No comments.
Is it your shotgun?
No comments.
Is that a shotgun that was used to kill your mum and your brother and sister?
No comments.
I mean, I can confirm that this knife was taken from you by police officers, okay?
No comments.
Why did you have that knife in your pocket?
No comments.
It's obviously covered in blood. Whose blood is that?
No comments.
Have you stabbed someone with that knife?
No comments.
When police got there and found your mum, your brother and your sister, on your mum, or right next to her, is a book called How to Kill Your Family. Have you ever seen a book with a cover like that at your home address?
No comments.
Did it belong to you?
No comments.
Or did it belong to someone else living there?
No comments.
Have you ever touched that book? Because it was found right next to your mum.
No comments.
Was it just a coincidence that your mum fell where that book was?
No comments.
Have you read that book?
No comments.
Book with that title was right next to your mum. Has it got any significance?
No comments.
Have you been planning how to kill your family?
No comments.
Did you get any tips from that book?
No comments.
But now Nicholas confessed that his family's resistance had forced him to rush his carefully planned timeline. He had intended to end them all quietly, and then to head out to St. Joseph's during the morning drop-off. But his mother's scream and the struggle ruined everything. He panicked and left early. The judge would later call this a sliding doors moment, a terrible tragedy that prevented an even greater one. In the courtroom, Nicholas sat motionless. He refused to stand for the judge. He barely looked up. He pleaded guilty to all 3 murders, as well as charges related to firearms and possession of a sharp implement. The details of the case were laid out in full. Jurors saw his YouTube videos, the typed plans, the note where he wrote, "I was right in predicting no one would have called the police had I killed them in their sleep." He admitted to wanting to cannibalize my family and rape a woman at knife point before the shooting. When asked why, he simply wrote, "Because I could." His father, Ray Prosper, was present in court. As the judge described the murders, Ray sobbed audibly, and he didn't stop until his son was taken away. At an earlier hearing, he'd shouted, "I still love you, son. It's not your fault, okay?" But in a written statement, he also said, "When I heard the horrendous news that day, part of my soul died too. This is a lose-lose situation for us all." The courtroom wasn't just filled with grief though, there was anger too. And the anger wasn't just aimed at Nicholas Prosper, but at the system that didn't stop him sooner. It seems there were many missed opportunities. On sentencing day, the courtroom was packed. The public, the press, grieving loved ones were all watching. Mrs. Justice Chima Grube delivered her verdict. It was to be life imprisonment. with a minimum term of 49 years. That meant Nicholas Prosper would be eligible for release when he was 68 years old.
For about a year after leaving sixth form college in Luton, where you were failing to work towards A-levels, you planned a school shooting on a scale that you hoped would make you globally notorious. You aimed for 34 deaths, one more than the deadliest shooting of recent times in the United States of America.
However, notably, he did not receive a whole life order, the sentence which is reserved for only the most serious of crimes, and a sentence where release is never an option. The judge gave 3 reasons. Nicholas had pleaded guilty, he was only 18 at the time of the crime, and critically, he was interrupted before carrying out his full plan. Had you completed what you intended, she said, this case would have had a very different, and even more appalling, outcome. To some, though, that reasoning wasn't enough. Shadow Justice Minister Kieran Mullen called the sentence unduly lenient. He questioned why a man who did this, and who intended to do even worse, should ever walk free. The Attorney General is now reviewing his sentence. If a whole life order is ever imposed, Prosper will never see freedom again. If it's not, he may one day be released. But regardless of that outcome, one thing is certain in this case. The officers who stopped Nicholas Prosper, and just stopped him on a hunch, saved an untold number of lives.
These are officers who had been working a night shift, so been up all night, had been to the crime scene and had to stand guard, helping to put in place cordons. They were travelling back to the police station and spotted the offender and thought something doesn't look right here, and went and investigated, and I'm extremely grateful that they did.
Perhaps one tragedy, in one way, put an end to the next.